Greetings, comrades. This is going to be a short little unscripted video. This is probably going to be the last video I do on Libya for a while because I've been really kind of flogging a dead horse with this one. And not much new has really happened. As it stands, the rebels are approaching their deadline, in which they will probably launch their kind of full assault against Sirte. I believe they captured Benoid, I think it's called quite recently. It's that's a town that was held by Gaddafi troops just to the south of Misrata, and now they're poised a few kilometers away from Sirte, having artillery engages. Much of Gaddafi's family has fled. Gaddafi is probably in one of the southern towns. I think once Sirte is gone, that'll be Gaddafi's last link to the sea. Not much. I doubt he has any boats or anything left. But apart from Sirte, there's a kind of a series of towns in the southwest of Libya, which are quite spread out. There is much desert in between it. So there's quite a large town. I'm sorry, my Libyan geography is terrible. There's a town in the southeast that's quite large. It seems the largest place still under Gaddafi forces control. And I think after this attack, which will probably cost both sides quite dearly, but of course the rebels being guided by NATO and their air forces will probably come out on top. This last town in the south will probably be the scene of quite a large battle, possibly more intense than we saw in Tripoli, because Gaddafi's back is against the wall, as it stands. The resistance his side has put up has definitely surprised me. I'll admit that I thought that after Tripoli was taken that it would just they would crumble. So what I'm assuming at this point is that the areas Gaddafi still controls have populations that are quite loyal to him. The remaining soldiers that he has are probably very loyal to him. As for their military equipment, it's hard to say. They've obviously got artillery. It's reasonable to assume they've got some kind of old Soviet tanks and some BMPs. Numbers are very hard to guess at this point. There was a lot of reports in recent weeks. About a week ago, NATO destroyed something like over 20 armoured vehicles that were heading north, I think, towards Misrata or Tripoli. So, but everything he's got, I believe he's got a few Scuds as well. I heard some reports of Scuds being launched. But anyway, I don't know if he's going to make a last stand around Sirte or this other city I described in the southwest. But what kind of what we're probably going to see is this assault on Sirte, which will be quite bloody, I'm sure, very intense, sort of street to street fighting. I doubt there'll be too much of the city left by the time they've finished. And probably in between that and this other city, assuming all resistance doesn't crumble off that, we're going to see a kind of a war of attrition. It's very, obviously it's very difficult to conduct any kind of a guerrilla warfare out in the desert. But if anyone can, it'll be Gaddafi's probably remaining special forces troops that he's got. The rebels are going to have a very hard time as well because these are the guys who took Tripoli, and I don't think they're really specifically trained for the kind of wide open desert spaces. They had enormous troubles getting across from Benghazi in a much more built-up area, so they're going to have problems with this. On the NATO camp, as I described in a previous video I did, the expropriation that's going on there is shocking. It's these men, this TMC, you know, okay, probably if the rebels wanted to form any kind of government, form a Gaddafi regime, members are probably the most qualified. But their actions in relations to the things they promised to foreign states has shown their true nature and their true class alignment. It's completely contrary to the interests of the working people of Libya to have their oil sold by a unelected interim caretaker government to the countries that have just been bombing them the last few weeks. I mean, whether you believe the NATO intervention was right or wrong, the point is the Libyan rebels owe nothing to them. They don't owe one red cent because the majority of the people of Libya did not choose to have America and France and Britain and Qatar and all these other countries begin bombing their country. Nobody took a vote on it. I guess the circumstances weren't great. But definitely, a decision like this should not be made until after an elections. And there's clearly strategy to this. It seems to fit very well with the kind of the neoliberal policies of the West. Just to simply, I mean, I think probably more than Iraq, we're probably going to see post-Soviet Russia kind of a situation in Libya. I mean, okay, on the one hand, it's been battered to shit by war. They're probably most of their infrastructure is probably quite fucked at least in the western half of the country. I suppose they might have had some time to kind of fix things up. But even in Benghazi, I doubt things are running at pre-war conditions. Now, Libya is not known for its fields of wheat or its high-tech technology. It's just got oil. That's the only real bargaining chip that the people of Libya have. It's their source of wealth. It's, Gaddafi, despite his faults, maintain a country with a very high standard of living, especially for an African country. The people are well educated. They had free education. I believe they had free housing, free healthcare. Though I seem to get the impression from the research I've done that he may have been rolling back a bit on this in light of opening up with the West more. Gaddafi was, he assisted America in its war on terror. I don't know the specifics, but he was friendly to them, and he apparently, I believe he dismantled his chemical weapons, or he said he was going to anyway. I'm surprised that if he does have any, he hasn't used it, but maybe he's just reserving it if he ever got invaded by foreign troops. But the point is, we're going to see they're going to sell off all the state-owned industries pretty quickly, I think. They're going to sell off they've sold off the state oil industry. Libya's one source of wealth to foreign governments, and, I doubt that the workers are going to get a fair cut. China and Russia are probably happy. Their interests have probably been well protected. There's the other risk of sectarian violence. You've got these Islamist militias running around. It's difficult to say. I mean, they knocked off that guy who was the chief of the rebel army. And some people say it was Gaddafi's agents, but I'm inclined to believe that it was Islamists who were pissed off. I believe he's involved in a prison massacre sometime before the uprising. So if they're willing to kill, their own army leader, it does raise the question of what else are they willing to do, or maybe they'll be happy to lay down their arms in favor of national unity, but we don't know. There's also the question of how long will Gaddafi keep resisting? I mean, are we going to see kind of a Vietnam type situation, sorry, a Cambodia type situation, where Gaddafi's reduced to perhaps having a few base camps on the Algerian border and sending over some cross-border raids? I mean, I was quite surprised to find out that his forces had already early on kind of slipped over the Tunisian border, were fighting the rebels in Tunisia and even clashed with the Tunisian army. But Algeria is much more friendly to Gaddafi. They're sheltered to his family. So it would not surprise me if they ended up kind of turning a blind eye if Gaddafi kind of hid on their border areas. I'll be honest, I'm completely ignorant about Algeria's relationship with NATO and the US. I don't even really know too much about what's been going. I know they've had protests and stuff as part of this Arab Spring, but to be honest, my knowledge of Algeria is nothing. So I'm really not an expert. So anyone who is an expert in Algeria, feel free to fill in some gaps. So, I think there's definitely a chance that armed conflict could carry on for longer than the so-called the war, as it were. There'll probably be insurgencies. Again, I don't know too much about the different Sunni Shiite, what's going on there in Libya. I don't know how much of a difference there is. I think the Berbers will be okay. I don't think anyone's out to really hurt the Berbers. And there is, of course, the question of the black Africans who have allegedly been targeted by rebel forces on the auspices that there was kind of an assumption that kind of any black people in the country were working and fighting for Gaddafi. And I can assume there'll be a negative backlash for a statement that Gaddafi made a few years ago. He basically said he wanted Libya to become a black nation, and that Arab men and women should marry with black men and women and have kids and try and Africanize what is a predominantly Arab country, which is kind of surreal. I don't think I've ever heard of a leader calling for complete ethnic change in such an overt way of his country. But he had a lot of strange thoughts, so it doesn't surprise me. But there's always the worry there'll be a backlash against this, and kind of which family was a rebel, which family was with Gaddafi and stuff. There may be feuds. They seem to have kept a pretty good job of keeping law and order. One encouraging sign is that the people of Tripoli resorted to kind of defending their own areas and setting up militias just to protect their own neighborhoods, independent of Gaddafi or the rebels. So this is an example of working people armed, self-organized, and defending itself. And I hope they hold on to that idea. As a Marxist, I believe in the self-organization and the self-empowerment of the working class. There's an absence of a Communist Party, which would be interesting to see if the Communist Party of Libya does kind of arrive. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting place over the next couple of years as things develop, and I hope I get a chance to kind of go there and see what happens. But like I say, in terms of anti-imperialist struggle, NATO's got its tentacles where it wants it, on the oil. I doubt, there'll probably be some, kind of foreign reconstruction companies coming in and cleaning up the mess. And all kinds of things like that, perhaps getting involved in the education system or the healthcare system. So we'll see that. So I think rather than post-war Iraq, we're probably going to see Libya turn into more an example of post-Soviet Russia, with an aggressive selling off of state-owned industries and services. And, we'll wait and see what kind of capitalism rears its ugly head in Libya after Gaddafi. And whatever, the the Libyan story is far from over. Anyway, I, unless something really crazy happens, I don't think I want to talk about this subject, um, again anytime soon. So, yeah, red salutes.